First, let's start by looking at the structure of the biological neuron. The main parts that we will be looking at is the three main parts of the biological neuron, consisting of the dendrites, the cell body, the axon, and the synapse. So you can ignore the other parts. The mitochondrion, if you recall from biology, it's considered like a powerhouse, one of the functions of it, but that's not relevant for our lecture today. Let's look at the dendrites. The dendrites are responsible for the input. So consider this the point of where the neuron receives the information and the input signals from whatever outside stimulus or outside source of information. And then we have the cell body. This is the second main part of it, and the cell body is also referred to as the soma, S-O-M-A, and the cell body is responsible for the processing of the input that comes in from the dendrites. And after being fed all that input, inside the cell body or the soma processes to figure out whether or not a neuron should be fired to trigger some sort of output signal. And in order for the synapse to receive that output signal, we have the third part of the neuron, which is the axon. And the axon is responsible for transporting that message from the cell body to the synapse. If the message from the cell body was needed to be transferred to a motor neuron, for instance, when the example we had with the cartoon, when the boy had an itch and he had to raise his arm, or the reflex test when you're hit on your knee, you need to trigger the relevant cells to know, okay, yeah, we need to move that knee. And that the axon is responsible for transporting that message to the synapse. Think of the synapse area as the output, and that output is the connection between the axon and whatever other neuron dendrites are needed to receive that output in order to tell that motor neuron, yeah, you need to move or you need to raise that leg muscle. Our biological neuron can receive multiple signals, thousands of signals at once, and it can have more than one set of dendrites. So when the cell body has to determine whether or not a neuron needs to fire an impulse, yes or no, should we have a trigger or not, that ability to fire depends on a total sum of the inputs. And biologically, we have inhibitory signals and excitatory signals. An example of a biological excitatory signal, which is a type of input, is epinephrine or dopamine. So if our body gets a trigger, it gets an input to trigger some sort of fight or flight reaction, that output would stimulate that neurotransmitter epinephrine. And when we produce epinephrine, it increases our heart rate. It makes the synapse reaction causes our heart rate to increase. We can gain muscle strength. It can even increase our blood pressure. And the reason this happens is that it's preparing our body to respond and to deal with some sort of strenuous activity. And another excitatory input is, like I mentioned, dopamine. So whatever triggers our dopamine, that gives us a sense of reward, and we are more likely to repeat that activity. That's actually one of the reasons a person can be addicted to something as simple as food. Certain types of food, like if it's high in fats and sugar or salt, a certain combination, like fries and burgers, it's why you can be more addicted to eating that as opposed to broccoli, because it triggers something in your brain, that dopamine, like, oh my god, I love this, and we want to repeat that behavior. I also mentioned inhibitory inputs, and an example of that is serotonin. So the inhibitory reaction, if we are prompted to produce serotonin, it generally, one of the examples is that it can reduce anxiety. So if it senses that if our body gets a reaction that, okay, yeah, we're getting too anxious for something, our brain has a response to help us deal with that anxiety. And serotonin actually can help us sleep as well too. Now, if we were to look at this diagram here, we see this is just a sketch of the same thing over here. So here we have the dendrites, which is the input. And then we have our cell body, which is the processing unit, to figure out if something's going to happen or not, if we need to raise an alarm or have some sort of inhibition effect. And then the axon sends that message to the relevant neurotransmitter. And this is the artificial neural network. This is our artificial neuron. And you are seeing a similarity with the structure over here. For our artificial neuron, we have our inputs, and these inputs are transferred to our processing area, and then it's outputted. And you can actually see from this basic model that the artificial neuron is a mathematical model to the biological one, because in the processing unit here, we have some mathematical calculations that go on that I would explain later on. But for now, I just want you to see the similarity. So now that we have an idea of the similarity, in the next lecture, we elaborate on the same artificial neuron and even see how this can relate to a natural language processing or text-based example.